if this is a big issue that you're really concerned about, what are you actually doing about it? Or are you just saying you're not racist? Hello, my dearest friends, and welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Tumblin. And look at me, man. Look at me. I'm being so virtuous, right? I mean, come on. I'm giving out all these podcast episodes for free, all this knowledge, all this wisdom, posting on my Instagram for free. Like, man, you ever think about how noble and generous I am? You know, it really pained me to say that, and I'm sure it pained you to hear it. But why? What was I doing there? It's something called virtue signaling, and it has always been around, but it seems to be rearing its ugly head today, particularly. Maybe it's just because I'm recognizing it more. But what's up with this, man? What's up with virtue signaling? Happens all the time. So many people do it. We all do it, I guess, in some level. We'll get into that. But why is this such a thing, and why is it such a natural human tendency? And, you know, as I do often, I'm going to sort of throw in some evolutionary explanations on why we do this, even from like a psychological perspective. Like, why the hell do we virtue signal? What's the value in it? And, or at least what do we think the value is in it? And so on. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about virtue signaling. What is virtue signaling? Well, I'm sure you know, but it's basically when, you know, you say something or even do something to basically indicate that you are virtuous, to basically indicate that you have done a good deed. You know, and you could say it, or you could do it, but let's go through an example of saying it. You know, you could say, let's say you're at a work meeting and one of your coworkers says, you know, I have this great charity that my daughter is promoting here, and I'm accepting donations for this charity. And you say out loud, well, Sonia, I donated last week $20, but I will donate again because I am such a generous person. Here's an extra $20. Is everyone seeing this on the, hey boss, do you see me handing this $20 bill? So that's like modern virtue signaling, right? That one's quite obvious. And you know the feeling of disgust when you see someone do that, right? It's just terrible. But that's a modern example. But you don't actually need to say that you contributed, right? Like, this is why it's so weird. You know, they say, oh, well, I donated $20 before, and here's another $20. It's like, you don't need to say you've already donated $20. That doesn't contribute to the conversation at all. You're just trying to say, hey, look at me. I've already donated, and I am so generous that I'm willing to donate more, right? You want to show off a little bit because you want others to know. To know what? To know that you were virtuous, to know that you're a good person, right? But it can also be an action. You know, another example of this, you see this a lot. This is really hard to see and nice to see at the same time. It's sort of a weird paradox, but, if you ever been on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram and you see like these videos of people going up to a homeless person with like a bag of food, right? And they're like, here, like, take this food. And then they got this camera in their face, right? Like, you can imagine how that makes a homeless person feel, right? To sort of have this camera in their face and they're hungry and they know that they need to bum food and, they got to take the food here, but then there's this camera in their face and yeah, they probably tear up and they probably cry, but like, that's so humiliating for that person, right? But what do? Well, we want to get it on camera, right? We can't just give a homeless person a bag of food. Like what? And no one's going to know about it? Come on, man. That's not right. Everyone has to know about this. Let's put this all over TikTok. I'm sure the people doing this have a good excuse, right? They say, well, I'm just trying to promote giving food to homeless. Maybe if people saw how happy they were when we give them food, more people would do it. And then, we create a better world. Maybe. Maybe not either. But have you ever thought about that? Like, really think about being in that position as a homeless person where, something went wrong in your life. And a lot of homeless people, man, they were just unlucky. They didn't do anything particularly wrong. I mean, or rather, they haven't done anything more wrong than anyone else. I mean, I've made mistakes in my life. I'm sure you've made mistakes in your life. And I'm sure there were certain situations when maybe you could have ended up in a situation just like that. Like, you really don't know. And for us to think that we can't be, or we couldn't have ever been in that position is sort of a bit of an ego thing. But to not only be in a position where you need to take food from other people or you die, but also to have to do it with a camera in your face, like, come on, man. it's humiliating for them. If you're going to do that, do it with humility, do it with love, and doing it with kindness, and don't do it with a damn camera in their face. Anyways, moving on. Let's talk about a few more modern manifestations of this virtue signaling that you see. And again, this has been around forever, but what I see a lot today is, that it comes up in many ways. In some ways, it's subtle. Other ways, it's not so subtle. So, for example, sharing posts on modern ideologies might actually not be such a conspicuous way of virtue signaling. You see people share posts like Black Lives Matter or diversity and inclusiveness, all these things that people they share on their Instagram or Facebook. And, why are they doing that, right? Because you have to ask the question, like, what benefit are you doing in just sharing something like that? Like, I think most people, if you're concerned about race issues, and this is something that's really serious to you, I think one of the best ways that most people can do is to go out and try and actually understand someone that struggled with these things, as opposed to just sharing this on Facebook, like, hey, look at me, I'm not a racist. It's like, well, have you ever spoken to anyone? Like, and this is so uncomfortable to do this, right? Like, it's not an easy conversation to talk about someone. I mean, I heard Thoraya on a few episodes ago. I think it was 117. But we talked about her sort of the religion of Islam and her sort of identity, and like these conversations are not easy to have, but like if you do it with a mutual understanding, they can be really, really beneficial for both parties. And so like if you're ever concerned about these things, that's probably one of the best things to do. But no, what do? We do the easy thing. We just hit share. Like, think about how easy that is. Like, you want to be virtuous? Oh, just click this button right here, share. And then everyone's going to see how virtuous you are. It's like it's the easiest thing in the world. And social media has sort of made it so easy for us to virtue signal. But there's also, these are subtle examples, because you might not actually think that they are virtue signaling. Because you probably feel good about that. Like I feel good about that when I see people share things like that. It's like, oh, okay, Johnny's not a racist. Well, great. But it's like, again, why are they doing that? They're doing that so that you think that. They're doing that so you say, oh, Johnny's not a racist. Well, he's a good person. What a guy, that Johnny, right? But there's lots of not so subtle examples. Things like publicly declaring that you've donated, right? Like the example I gave earlier. I've had a coworker say at one of these things, oh, what a wonderful charity, and one that I will be contributing to. That's word for word, what he said. And it's like, okay, well, dude, what are you doing there if not virtue signaling, right? That's very, very obvious. Here's one that you may actually not realize is a form of virtue signaling, modern virtue signaling, and that's climate change and diversity. I did bring up diversity just a second ago, but now listen. I'm not a climate change denier, and in fact, whether or not climate change is true or not, it doesn't even matter to this argument at all, okay? It doesn't matter if it's true. Here's what matters. Many politicians are out there, and what they're saying is, oh, look at me, I care about the environment. Look at me drinking this reusable bottle. Look at me, I care about diversity, and look at me, I'm not racist. Now, why are they doing that? Like, if they really cared about the environment, they would probably make some personal changes in their lives. They probably have some policies and things that they would change, and that's in line with current science. That's not stuff that's just in line with what everyone thinks is good for the environment, but things are actually in line with scientific research that actually talk to climate change experts and so on and figure out the best way to do that. But that's not what they want. They don't really care about the environment. They don't really care about diversity. What they care about is public opinion. What they care about is public support. And so what they're doing there is they're saying, hey, look, I am someone that is of good moral character because look at the things I care about. I care about the things that you care about. Look at me. I'm so virtuous. They do this for public support. And do they actually care about the environment? Do they actually care about diversity? Maybe not. But whether they do or whether they do not, it actually doesn't matter, because the reason that they're doing this is to gain public support. They're virtue signaling. And this is sort of things that you have to do in politics in some way. I'm not saying that there's never a place for this, because there is something to be said about marketing and about selling yourself, right? But it's, again, it gets down to, is it subtle? Is it not so subtle? Is it blaringly obvious? And do you fundamentally care about the environment? Because you can virtue signal about something that you actually care about, you genuinely care about, and you can do that strategically. And it's a really complex thing. I don't want to get into that too much. But I do want to get into why we actually virtue signal to begin with. I mentioned the politicians, which is a great example. They do it to gain public support, right? But why do we all do it? Like if we're just sort of on Facebook sharing posts and everything, and even if you don't virtue signal, let's say you're just not a person that virtue signals, I'm sure you recognize that impulse, right? I'm sure you recognize that impulse to be publicly recognized by society for your good deeds. Like when you do something good, or if you're really smart, or if you're really good at a sport, you want other people to know about it. Of course you do. Why wouldn't you, right? People respect you, people appreciate you, and it's this good feeling. It feels good to be appreciated. Wow, you're such a good person. Wow, you're so good at basketball. These kind of things. And essentially, what it gets down to is we virtue signal because we want to give an artificial idea of who we are. And I use that word artificial kind of loosely, because maybe it is actually who you are, right? Like maybe you actually do care about the environment, but you're virtue signaling on the side. So you can care about two things at one time, both the environment and how the world perceives you. But what's interesting is that when you virtue signal, it actually has a negative effect on how people perceive you, right? It's kind of like if you're like in the gym and you're lifting weights, and then your gym crush walks over, so you put some more weight on. Or like an extra plate, and you can't lift it, but you put it on there just because she's walking by. It's like, hey, look at this. This guy's strong, right? Got a 3-plate bench press, right? And you take them off as they leave because you're weak as shit and you can't lift that. Sorry, did I say that? I did. But actually, what's psychologically driving this is the need to conform to groups. That was a joke, by the way. What's psychologically driving this is a need to conform to groups. And, I've talked about groups quite a bit lately, so I don't want to beat the dead horse on this one, but we're constantly looking for social validation. We're constantly looking for, ways to sort of survive. And really, that's what it gets down to. It's a matter of survival. Again, human beings have formed groups to increase our chances of survival. And so historically speaking, isolation and ostracism literally meant death. Like you couldn't survive on your own when we evolved in tribes. So basically, when you are virtue signaling, you're saying, look at me. I value what the group values. I am one of you. I am one of you. I am part of the group. Protect me. I'll protect you. That's what you're saying. You're doing it for sort of public validation so that you don't get ostracized, because we do not want to get ostracized. We do so many things, so many irrational things, just from a sort of the psychological need to conform and fit into the group. Now, here's why it's actually wrong, because you may be asking yourself, and it's a really good question. Like, if virtue signaling is going to make you look better in front of your peers and everyone else, and that's going to increase your social status, and that's going to increase your, move you up the hierarchy and make you safer because you're in a group, like, why wouldn't you virtue signal? And here's why. Virtue signaling actually diminishes the purity of the act. Okay, virtue signaling diminishes the purity of the act. It raises the question, are you donating because you genuinely care, or because you want us all to believe that you genuinely care? And those things are two very different things, right? Like if you genuinely cared about the charity, you'd give in private probably. I mean, you might do it publicly, but like it wouldn't be like, to show everyone. You'd just be, okay, it's convenient. Let's just donate right now. But if you really cared, if you genuinely cared about the charity, the fact that you do it in private or in public is irrelevant. It doesn't matter because you don't give a shit. All you care about is the fact that this money gets to that charity that's going to help people. And so you wouldn't really care about who knows, right? Because that's not why you're doing it. We all know this feeling. Like when someone virtue signals, it's like, this guy. Like, do you have to say that you donated? Do you really? Come on, man. But, I'm not sure... I'm sure in some of those sneakier ways of virtue signaling, we actually don't, right? Like I mentioned earlier, how if you see a friend share a post on like Black Lives Matter or something like that, or some anti-racist thing, there's this little part of you that's like, oh man, Johnny's not racist. Man, what a good guy. We live in a great world now. Nobody's racist. This is amazing, right? So it's kind of weird because they're virtue signaling, and it makes you feel a little bit of an appreciation towards that person. But that's why they're doing it. That's the thing. That's why they're doing it. That's why you have to be careful with these very subtle notions of virtue signaling, because, again, do they really care about race issues? Maybe. Maybe not. But they are virtue signaling, that's for sure. And so it's a weird thing that you have to sort of juggle with. Oh, look at Janice sharing that Black Lives Matter picture on Facebook. I'm not racist either. I better like that. I better like that. And you know what? I'm going to share it too, because I want everyone to know that I'm virtuous as well. And this is an interesting thing, is that virtue signaling can actually feed off itself, right? Like when you're in a group, so say, I'm not racist. And then the other person says, well, I'm not racist either. And then before you know what, everyone's saying, and everyone's so happy. Hey, we're all not racist. We all feel good about ourselves. And it's like, okay, well, what have you done to help contribute to the problem of racism? Like if this is a big issue that you're really concerned about, what are you actually doing about it? Or are you just saying you're not racist? Are you actually talking to anyone about these issues on a deep, really often uncomfortable level? It's really, really interesting thing. And so, this whole idea of virtue signaling, it's like it reduces the purity of the act. Like, why are you actually doing it? And so if you're doing it, you can do both. You can genuinely care about the environment. Again, I want to make sure this is clear. You can do both. You can virtue signal and genuinely care about the other thing. But if you virtue signal, there's a possibility that you don't care about the other thing. And if you actually do the act that is actually virtuous and don't give a damn about if anyone ever sees it, then obviously you can be 100% sure in the integrity of the act. Now I got some readings on this, which I'm gonna read here some great quotes. The first one here is actually from Matthew 6:1, and I quote, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." Okay, interesting there. He says in front of others to be seen by them. Now that's the key phrase there, because you could say, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. Okay, well that doesn't make sense. Like, why? Like, why can't you do a good act in front of others, right? Like if I give a homeless person food when it's just me, or if I do it in front of 100 people, the act itself is no different, but it's why are you doing it? It's the intention behind that. And that's really what Matthew's meant by this. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. That's the key phrase. Why are you doing it? What's the real intention? And if you're doing things as a form of virtue signaling, a lot of times people get the impression that you're not really doing it because you genuinely care. You're literally doing it so that people see you and appreciate you and think better of you. So it really gets down to the intention of the act. Got a wonderful quote here from Marcus Aurelius, which I'm going to read, and I quote, "A man, when he has done a good act, does not call out for others to come and see, but he goes on to another act, as a vine goes on to produce again the grapes in the season." See, what powerful imagery here, right, from Marcus Aurelius. Like, imagine a grapevine, right? Like when it grows a grape, it just moves on to the next grape. And that's what Marcus Aurelius urges us to do in terms of being virtuous. When you do a good deed, when you do something good for someone else, don't like go scream it from the housetops, like, hey, look at this great deed I did. And from that perspective, it's like, well, you could be doing more. Like, why are you telling everybody you did this great deed? You could be doing more great deeds. And that's what actually Marcus Aurelius urges you to do. Don't just, hey, everyone, come and see. Hey, look at this wonderful thing I did. No. Go on to the next act. Okay? And again, this gets down to the intentions of why you're doing it. If you're calling out for others to come and see, you're probably not doing it because you actually give a damn about the actual act. You're probably doing it so that others can actually see you. And I got one more reading I'm going to read for you, and then we're going to end it there. This is actually from the Discourses of Epictetus, the Scholar Select version. This is actually in the, what would you call it, the intro. The intro that was written by, and I want to get this right because I said his name wrong before, John Lancaster Spalding. So this is what he wrote in the introduction about Epictetus, and so this little paragraph really hits this point home. And I quote, "For Epictetus, a virtuous life is not a means but an end. The sage does right, not from the hope of prosperity and good name, not that he may have health of body and mind, not because wise behavior produces a contented and happy temper, but he does what is just, avoids what is base, without thought of reward or punishment, impelled solely by a sense of duty. He clings to virtue, though virtue be his death sentence, and though he have no expectation of a future life. He makes no sacrifice in abandoning all things for virtue is his only good. He who wishes to please men, who desires to be known and praised, even for his virtue, is not a lover of virtue, as he who loves money or pleasure or glory is not a lover of mankind. The wise man's will rolls like a wheel with steady and even motion toward the one eternal goal to which the universe also is drawn. If there be any worth in thee, O man, learn to walk alone, to converse with thyself. He who wishes to please men, who desires to be known and praised even for his virtue, is not a lover of virtue. That's the key point here. When you virtue signal, the act itself ceases to be virtuous. That's it. Thanks so much for listening. I hope it was a great episode for you. I hope go out there and call out some virtue signalers for me, will you? Because, be nice about it though. Be stoic, be pro-social, but go see if you can recognize some virtue signaling in other people, and particularly if you can see it in yourself. It's an interesting thing as well. If you want to support me, there's lots you can do. You can check me out on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. You can find me everywhere at the Strong Stoic or Brandon Tumblin. You can check out my website at brandontumblin.com. You can check out my Patreon at the Strong Stoic. It's all on my website actually. I got a reading list on my website. I do live events on Instagram. I'm going to start scheduling some on TikTok probably in the coming year. And that's all I got for today, guys. Thanks again so much for listening. Cheers. Until next time.